Hi, everyone. We are just waiting for some other participants, attendees to show up, and then we'll get started. Thank you for your patience. Just about a minute or so more. Hello, everyone. Sorry about those technical difficulties. Thank you guys, everyone, so much for joining us. My name is Emmy Cook, and together with my colleague, Shannon Switzer Swanson, we'd like to welcome you and thank you so much for joining our session today on Photovoice as a participatory research approach to illuminating small-scale fisheries perspectives. We're very excited to be here as part of Too Big to Ignore's small-scale fisheries open house for this year's World Oceans Week. Before we dive in, we'd just like to introduce ourselves. So Shannon, would you like to go first?
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm Shannon Switzer Swanson. As Emmy said, I'm currently a doctoral candidate at Stanford University in the Emmett Interdisciplinary Program in Environment and Resources, as well as a National Geographic Explorer.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. My name is Emmy, and like Shannon, I'm a social ecologist and also an explorer with National Geographic. And I'm also the founder of Beyond the Surface International, the organization presenting this session. So we're a nonprofit based in Levitos, Peru, that works with young people from small-scale fishing communities to enhance social ecological well-being, cultivate resilience thinking, and strengthen community-based practices and policies for healthy oceans and people. So our mission is to provide innovative, positive youth development tools, trainings, and safe spaces for children from small-scale fishing communities to cultivate attuned, caring relationships with themselves, their society, and their marine environment. So we celebrate strengths. We also address challenges that impact their social, ecological well-being and sustainable futures. So we do this using several different positive youth development tools, such as surfing, swimming, and ocean play. We also facilitate mindfulness and wellness workshops disguised as superhero workshops. And then we also facilitate participatory transmedia storytelling. And that's a series we call Coast to Coast. So after Shannon, I'll be presenting on leveraging Photovoice as a form of transmedia storytelling and a positive youth development tool that can encourage youth participation in small-scale fishing villages, stewardship of their seas and communities. And then at the end, we'll save about 10 minutes or so, depending on our time, for questions and answers. So Shannon, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Emmy. I love the work that you all do with these transmedia tools. So I'm going to be sharing with you all specifically a little bit more about the method of Photovoice. And so as a researcher, it's one of the tools that I've been using as part of my thesis work and as part of a way of engaging with communities. And so and really bringing their voice to bear and things that are important to them to the research. So I'm going to share more about that as we dive into these slides. So basically the idea behind Photovoice, as you can see in this image, this is one of the fishermen that I worked with in Indonesia, one of his sons who has the underwater camera around his neck that we loaned to the community, and he's out fishing for food for his family, and he brought the camera along to document what was going on. And I was there with him as well, taking the picture. The basic idea behind Photovoice is that it puts cameras in the hands of participants, again, to make images of their lives, any aspect of their lives that are meaningful to them in some way. And the bigger concept is really trying to decolonize what's traditionally been somewhat of an imbalanced relationship between researchers and research participants, and really putting more of the narrative power back in the hands of the participants and community members. And so Photovoice is one of many tools that has been attempting to do this now for a while in various research spaces. And so before I go further into Photovoice specifically, I want to zoom out a little bit to the collective body of methods called what I've come to call visual participatory methods. So we can go to the next. Thanks. And so for one of my chapters, I have been working on a systematic review of how these visual participatory methods, which include various forms of film and still community photography and videography. And so I have co-authored recently a paper that's it's about to go out in the Journal of Biological Conservation. And it was looking at how visual participatory methods have been used in conservation research specifically. Because as you'll see similar with Photovoice's background, a lot of these tools have been used in more of the public health space and the education space. And more recently, they've been starting to be used in the environmental, and then even more specifically, the conservation space. So the three really high level findings from that review and that was looking at about, I think it was 24 different case studies of conservation researchers who used one form of a visual participatory method to work with the community around a conservation issue. And so from that analysis, we found that the tools are really well suited for, I'm just going to read this off the slide, but for understanding how participants' perceptions of their social ecological systems have evolved over time and been shaped by historical events. So really understanding from the past to now, what sort of historical events, relationships have come to shape what we're seeing now. And then it's also really useful for understanding participants' current perceptions of their social ecological systems, how they situate themselves within it, and how their values and worldviews may align or conflict with those of interacting institutions. So that's something we saw a lot, that often in these environmental spaces or social ecological systems, the Photovoice or whatever visual participatory method is being used really gets at what are these sort of overlapping institutions that are in that space where the community lives, and what are the dynamics between those relationships. And then third, and really importantly, It's also been used to help uncover potential avenues for reconciling those differences in worldviews between those overlapping institutions, and coming to some reconciliation around issues in the community. Yeah, so that's that slide. And then we also found a little more specifically, these were several ways that researchers had used visual participatory methods. So they'd been used to identify effects of longstanding exclusion from protected areas, to really reveal nuanced differences between the values, meanings, and moralities around resources and spaces and landscape features, and just ways of understanding and being in the natural system. Then they were also used to document specific place connections and very detailed traditional ecological knowledge, to reconceptualize humans in relation to nature. So really, again, getting at that rich and nuanced understanding of how participants and community members envision themselves as part of their surroundings. And then we found that a lot of what was revealed, this one's a little different, but was that when there was any sort of issue, having the pairing of community agency along with external support really led to productive solutions around different conservation and environmental conflicts, or not necessarily conflicts, but just challenges that were happening in the community. And then lastly, there were quite a number of different conservation outcomes. So it wasn't just understanding what was happening, but often the community then wants to act on these things and implement them in a productive way. So that we found that the visual participatory method projects had led to new legislation, new programs, and new partnerships and new dialogue groups who hadn't interacted before. So it actually has some really tangible outcomes, as they can be used for really tangible outcomes as well, depending on how the community wants to proceed with the findings. So that's a little bit broadly about visual participatory methods, and I'll go a little more quickly through the other slides. But Photovoice specifically was started, well, it was formalized in the literature as we by Caroline Wang and Marianne Burris in 1997. And they first used it to help to work with communities in rural China where they were having sanitation issues. And development agencies that had been in there before tried solutions that were, had worked in other places or that were thought to be like a prescribed solution, and they weren't working in these particular communities. And so they, the researchers implemented Photovoice, and they found that actually what the community really needed was clean water reservoirs. And so that was not the angle that the public health agencies had been coming at, because they didn't understand the nuanced local social conditions. And so from that, that was the first published paper on the using in this type of a setting. And again, it was born from this belief that it was time for researchers to stop bringing in their own agenda and to start listening to what the communities actually were interested in and were topics that were important to them. Thank you. And for anyone interested, the theory, just briefly, is it's from health education. I mentioned public health has used it a lot, feminist critique, and then also, interestingly, documentary photography. And this is an image by Dorothea Lange, the migrant mother. It's a fairly famous image, but it actually led to a lot of action around welfare programs and things to support people who were struggling after the Great Depression, around the Great Depression. So the idea from documentary photography that they bring into Photovoice is that there can be some action that results from sharing these stories. And so that's the origin story of Photovoice. The guiding mantra and this is all again according to Wang and Burris, who formalize the method, is VOICE, the acronym VOICE, and it's voicing our individual and collective experience. And originally they saw it as a needs assessment and evaluation tool. So what is needed in the community, and then what also are the strengths that are already there that they value and appreciate. And since it's been used for a lot of other ways, as I mentioned. Go ahead. Okay, so already sort of said that, and yeah, recording strengths and concerns, and also then as not just having that be in a silo or in a bubble, then if the community is interested, promoting dialogue, critical dialogue, and knowledge around those issues, both within the community, through discussing the photographs, but then also thinking about ways to reach out to policymakers or whoever it could be relevant to. So then the idea of the data collection is, it's purposive sampling or snowball sampling. So it is high internal validity. You're really getting a really rich picture of what's going on in the community. That's not going to be generalizable to outside other communities. And so it's not random sampling. It's definitely recruiting people who would be interested in the method, who want to participate, who have some motivation to be a part of it, because it is pretty time intensive. So, and I'll talk about that more at the end. But so then implementing some training instructions is me working with some of the fishermen in Indonesia, where I did my thesis work. And then there's a range of collaboration around the prompts themselves. So I think in hindsight with my project, I came in pretty much with an idea of what I was interested in, which was perception of time and how it influences resource use. And that's not something that the community necessarily cared about. So I think I've learned a lot about sort of the spectrum of participatory ness. That's not the best word for it, but of ownership, I guess I should say. And so in the future, I think I would have a lot more discussions with the community before deciding what this prompt would be. So, but I'll share more about my specific project later. But so it can be collaboratively decided upon. The great thing is, even though I did have my own prompt initially, the community, there's still so much space for the community to still share about what's important. You're asking them to take pictures of things that are meaningful to them. So there still is a lot of space for them to have that power. Okay, so then the training is important if depending on the community you're working with, but like these gentlemen did not have experience with cameras like this. So that's important. And then the participants go out and for however long you agree upon and make images, then come back and select, however many you wanted to, or they want to share or discuss. And those are the interviews where there's this narration around the image and the meaning behind it to the participant. Okay. Next slide, thank you. And so then for on the research side of things, the analysis, and again, there's this spectrum of participations. Researchers have really tried to incorporate community members in the actual analysis as well. Once the interviews are over and we're going through and doing the qualitative coding of those and identifying themes that emerge. And again, it should always, the analysis should always reflect topics that are important to the participants. And then it can also include, like in the case of my project, topics and things of interest to the researcher. But that, again, it's best that that's all discussed ahead of time with like a memorandum of understanding or some sort of contract with the community, so everyone's on the same page and has the same expectations. And then the results are shared back with the participants and discussed. So that can be in a one-on-one setting or in a focus group setting. And then additionally can be shared to the broader community beyond just those who participated in Photovoice if that's desired. And then also, again, pursue some action around them if desired. So this is just a image from one of the focus groups that we conducted as a follow-up to one of the efforts. Yeah, in the community thing, go on. So just briefly, how I'm doing on time here. I don't want to take, okay. So my fieldwork was in central Sulawesi, as you see here, and in the Banggai Archipelago, which zooms out. And these three villages, Popisi, Bone Baru, and Toropot, they're predominantly fishing villages. Bone Baru is actually a satellite, has a satellite office for the Indonesian NGO called LINI, or the Indonesian Nature Foundation. And so they have staff that works here and has been working with Popisi, that works in Bone Baru and has been working in Popisi. And Toropot is a community that is a fishing community that hasn't engaged with any real NGO or outside institutions. It's a little further out. And okay, we can go on. So just for a little context. And so this is Toropot. It's the predominantly the indigenous, traditionally nomadic group, the Sama Bajau, or locally they're referred to as the Suku Sama or Bajo. And so they traditionally lived in boats and were forced by government and economic pressures to settle in, often in communities like this is where they live now, in stilts above the water, because they still are really dependent on marine resources and harvesting those for their livelihoods. So it's within this context that, and I should say the other village, Popisi, is also predominantly of the same group. And so it's within this context that I employed the Photovoice method. And so it was in total, it was with 45 people and those three villages that he showed. And so my prompt in this wanting to understand perception of time was to make images of things that represent the past, present, and future to you, for the participant. And then we were gonna come back and we discussed those. And so again, it kind of resulted in these two layers of data, which is that this is an image, this shark image that one of the fishers took, but of things that them, and but also me having some insight into how they thought about those in relation to time, which again, it wasn't something that was, I don't think, important to them, but it did allow for a lot of space for them to talk about what was important to them. And then we had the focus groups, and I should say it's really important to partner. And that was one of the findings from our systematic review also, was that having a local partnership with a local NGO or some community engaged organization that's been for a while is really critical as an outside researcher, because they're really able to convey the meaning of the project, to collaborate with the community, make sure he understands what's happening and why this is, explain what it is, and to ensure it is something the community wants to participate in, and then to be able to help facilitate things like the focus groups, because I wouldn't have been able to do that on my own. It was really Linny's capacity and already developed relationships that allowed for that kind of safe space and trust and whatnot to make the focus group discussions meaningful. Oh, I'm sorry, and it actually led it. So if you can go back, sorry, I mean, one key thing was that it actually did lend itself well. So the kind of past, present, future, it so happened that when I was conducting these focus groups in the community, there was an annual planning session for the village budgets. And so especially that future one was really interesting, and how it almost became this like community planning session, which was interesting to see. Thank you. And then I'm not going to share any comprehensive results, but I just wanted to give an example of what this looks like. So this is from Pat Dirto in Popisi. So he thought that this to him represented the past, which I actually was an interesting finding. A lot of times talking about children, they would talk about how it represented the past, which is different than I always think of children as being more of the future. And so that was interesting to me. But this was his comment. So these children can learn how to catch fish using a net, just like fishermen in the past. They are very happy when they catch fish. This is important because if they cannot continue to a higher school, they can still earn a living as a fisherman. And I thought this was interesting because a lot of the people I talked to said they didn't want their kids to become fishermen, but he frames it in this way that's like, well, this makes them happy, and it's part of, something that they already know how to do. So it's always, and in a sense, it's going to be there for them, even if they can't find a different way to earn a living. So that was an example of the past. And then this one I found really interesting. It happens to be about kids again, but this is Paasto Saura, and he says, these kids are learning about, this is for representing the present. These kids are learning about the Quran and how to recite for the MTQ, which is a Quran recitation competition. And last year there were no kids from Popisi who entered the Perlombaan, and I hope next year there will be. In the past, Suku-sama elders would recite a phrase from the Quran to talk to the spirits of the sea and ask for permission and for rejeki, which is like good luck or blessings. Today, younger people no longer do this, and sometimes this causes problems because we are taking without asking permission. People do not do this anymore because now we have more advanced tools like engines and chipo and better masks. And chipo is a octopus harvesting tool. And so this was, I found really interesting because I knew from speaking with other people who had worked with this indigenous group and the literature that there was a historic belief in spirits in the sea and sort of animistic traditions around that. But I hadn't known that this was intertwined now with Islam in a really interesting way. And then also that this gentleman felt that that's been lost in some way, and that linkage between this religious beliefs and meaning and then the resource, thinking about interacting with the resources was really an interesting finding. And then lastly, future. So this is, it's kind of hard to see these little boats out there on the horizon, but and they're fairly large boats for the area, but this is from Pat Parman, and this is a photo of the Pajeco boats. They catch too many fish and sell them cheap, making it harder for Popisi fishermen to sell their fish. Also, Pajeco catches the fish offshore, which keeps the fish from coming closer to shore where Popisi fishermen can catch them. So they catch fewer fish. Also, even though there's a law that Pajeco cannot enter the water 0 to 3 miles from shore, they still come closer than that. Because of this, I hope the government makes it illegal for Pajeco boats to fish around Banggai. So this is tangible, like he does not appreciate the Pajeco boats. And this is something, you know, that's a little more along the lines of something that could then be addressed, you know, with the local authorities, or it starts a conversation. And these images all started really interesting conversations in the focus group part of it, and then what we shared back with the local government. And lastly, I think it's the last one. I hope I'm not going too long, Emmy, I'm sorry.
You're fine, you're fine.
Okay, this is a gallery exhibit. So another really cool thing, which I think Emmy will share a lot about as well with her work, is again, having this, the results of this be public facing in a way that brings the broader community together. And so these are fisheries agents who are often just in the village legislating the fishermen and telling them that they're doing things illegally or fining them, or you know, saying they can't catch this, like adding one more traditional food to the no harvest list. But in this case, we were able to, the fishermen selected some of their favorite images, and we added their captions and their own narrative to those images, and had a gallery showing. And these powerful, you know, people in the community, these agents were there. And the pride of the fishermen was just, it was so palpable as far as just, and the fishing families more broadly beyond just the fishermen themselves. So was just really powerful to see, and seeing these agents have a new perspective on the fishermen and fishing families. I should be more inclusive. Yes, so I think that's about the last slide of mine. Okay, and then the challenges. So yeah, cameras. So of course there's always issues with giving and taking away of cameras, and the way I addressed that was leaving a camera for each of the village offices, so that they could, so it wasn't just to one person, but it was kind of a collective community tool that was left for them to continue to use. But it can get tricky depending on the situation. And then of course, like managing the gear, well, obtaining it in the first place, because they can be quite expensive when you're buying 50 of them. But yeah, maintaining the gear in remote areas where I was charging was really challenging. Making sure the prompt is you know, clear and again, makes sense and is something that the community wants to engage around. And then sustaining interest. So I had left the cameras with communities for a long time. I think like 6 months in some cases or longer. And initially there's a lot of interest, but then of course, like it kind of becomes hard to remember to be taking the camera around everywhere. So those are just some brief challenges to note if you're interested in using this method. And I'd be happy to share more about the details of that later in the question and answer. I think that's it. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And now Emmy's going to share about her incredible work.
Thank you so much, Shannon. That was so incredible. And thank you again for your time being a new mom, a PhD candidate. You're inspiring to me in many ways.
Oh, you're so sweet.
So I will share about now Photovoice being a tool to engage youth in small scale fishing communities in terms of like resilience and looking at well-being. Photovoice is this incredible tool, and it can be used also in a way to create positive change again with youth, but outside sort of like an academic, strictly academic sense. So again, why is this important? Definitely kids growing up in fish-dependent communities today are inevitably the generation who will be facing these monumental challenges that we discuss in terms of changing climate, industrializing planet, and rapidly depleting ocean. So as Shannon also had mentioned in her presentation, like many young children in fishing villages sometimes have lost faith in fishing as a source of cash or calories. And also parents tend to promote their kids moving to cities because I remember one father told me he would like his kid to work in the AC and at a computer and be comfortable. And so, you know, that's a bit disconcerting, especially simultaneously when young people from fishing communities tend to lack quality educational opportunities adapted to their rural realities, focused on practical issues within their marine and built environments needed to address these challenges. So, you know, as Dr. Michael Corbett says, one core problem is that implicitly defining educational success in terms of like a mobile population of youth exported to the urban areas, basically rural schools in small scale fishing communities may tactically promote the erosion of their own social capital. So essentially this educational pain leads to low retention rates, low generational turnover, out-migration, and just overall less adaptive capacity to address fishery scarcity, ocean degradation, all these big challenges that small-scale fishing communities face. So I always think about like if the next generation in small-scale fishing communities is not actually there, who will be there to stop a development company from coming in or, you know, implementing the FAO's SSF guidelines at the local level. So therefore, involving the youth as active stakeholders for their own well-being and resiliency of their seas is so critical. And we do this through Coast to Coast, which is Beyond the Surface's transmedia participatory workshop series. So we engage communities through their youth, engaging rural students to explore their ancient oceans and ancestral fishing communities as resilient researchers and skilled communicators using transmedia tools, community-based research practices, but then also impact storytelling techniques. It's basically just to illustrate their community's importance in the context of human ocean health and sustainable futures. And so really the goal is that youth become equipped with this integrated knowledge and also reconsider their small scale fisheries as cool, as respectable, decent livelihood options that are so integrated or interconnected to contributing to their community's well-being and preserving their natural cultural heritage. So basically also having ample space within small scale fisheries to promote their own innovation and entrepreneurship as well. So when we talk about positive youth development tools, we're saying that these will enable students to play an active role developing a nuanced understanding of their coastlines and community as an integrated marine social ecological system through homework assignments that actually utilize transmedia storytelling. So firstly, what is positive youth development? That's like a big fancy word that people can throw around a lot in grant writing and such, but really it's a framework that came out of the 1990s with more of an interest in focusing on the strengths youth have versus the problems kids develop growing up. You know, we all have developed. So, you know, whether that's learning disabilities or antisocial conduct or just low motivation or even drug use or drinking or neglect, basically we're not focusing on the negatives such, but focusing on developing positive pro-social capacities using resources available to youth in their community and natural environments, no matter what those are. So it begins with a vision of this child being fully eager to explore the world and gain competence and acquire capacity to contribute, importantly, as community leaders. I'll go through this relatively briefly, but in essence, there are these 6 C's that are not focused on fixing kids' behaviors, but just building and nurturing a child's belief and knowledge. So these include connection, confidence, character, competence, contribution, and caring. And I always think, wouldn't it be amazing if in fisheries co-management, these were all values that everyone was already bringing to the table? Probably things would be a lot easier. But it's incredible because development researchers often say that emotional dispositions are biologically hardwired in us. And so it implies that even variability by degree, but young people are hardwired to inherit these beliefs. And so the capacity for moral awareness is universal across cultures. So why not leverage these positive youth development tools in a way that could be in favor of supporting small-scale fisheries? And so, yeah, in 2014, we started with my partner, Nico, we started to facilitate these photography workshops as a way for students in small-scale fisheries to explore their creativity and observe their ordinary and sort of an extraordinary way that you can do looking through a camera lens. And during one of our first photography workshops with a group of students in the Mentawai Islands in Indonesia, one little girl, she took a photo of a woman with a plate of rice and fish, and she wrote this caption: "Rice and fish are best friends, but now fish doesn't come around as much as before, and that makes me and rice sad." And I know this caption sounds quite childish, and that's because it is, but her statement really shares this intimate experience or impression she has as, you know, in her reality growing up in a fish-dependent community. And so to me, it demonstrated just how intrinsically like tied her natural resources were to her emotions, and that of even the emotions of rice. And this is what fish being a staple source of protein means on like a deeper level. And so I often think, well, maybe if this girl had taken a survey about household nutritional security, this might not have come out in this level of intimacy or feeling. And that's because I think for humans, like narrative is just stitched into like the fabric of our human psychology. So we innately understand more through stories than we would just general facts. And so as a researcher or engaging with youth and trying to find, you know, solutions to issues and such, this just paints a more holistic and detailed picture. And it's not that anyone is giving someone a voice, it's that these children already have voices and we're simply providing a microphone. And so I will try and go a little quicker, but this is the power of photo voice. And so the following are 3 examples of impact storytelling techniques that we've leveraged to engage youth in small-scale fisheries as both researchers and communicators. And so the first example is from Vietnam. So I was working in Vietnam last year as part of a Fulbright National Geographic Fellowship, and before COVID sort of cut our research in half. But before I left, I was in country for about 5 months and working with local students and fisheries stakeholders and using Photovoice and other community-based research approaches as part of this initiative directed by Dr. John Kurian with the FAO to co-develop a participatory monitoring tool for implementing the SSF guidelines. So I partnered with a local school, the Monet, the fishing village where I was based, and we started to create these homework assignments for kids that included interviewing local fishermen, participating in market surveys, and then also photojournalism exercises focused exactly on what Shannon was mentioning about illuminating this interwoven role that fish play within the students' lives from ocean to plate, past, present, and future. So we did a community exhibition of the kids' work at the local school, and immediately we had more interest from local moms wanting to participate, and then later fishermen and even fish farmers. So I think this also demonstrates just how important local schools can be in small-scale fishing communities as a hub. When they are in their best, they are able to be a hub for social interactions, and especially when we champion the role of people's kids. So for the adult participants, I ended up just uploading. They asked me to upload their photos all to Facebook, and then in their own time, they could go with their phones and write their own captions, which it didn't even occur to me that could work, but I think they had the internet and the devices to do it. So that was really helpful. And so basically all these themes came out of the Photovoice workshops, and I think they coincide with different chapters also in the SSF guidelines. So examples included strengths. Many people mentioned the social capital that's involved in fisheries, whether they're fishermen or they're women involved in post-harvest activities. There was also a focus on the role of women. A lot of the women said that they feel like their participation in fisheries is just like a household chore, like doing the dishes or washing clothes, like mending nets or selling the fish was just part of helping the family. So in a sense, that makes sense why women's roles are sometimes hidden in fisheries. We also were looking at livelihoods, so whether they were a fisherman or also the man who makes the propellers for the boats, they were demonstrating how interwoven fishing is with their livelihoods. So participants also highlighted well-being, how lucky they were to live along the coastlines, but then also we're talking about the challenges, for example, the plastic pollution, pulling up nets after hours of setting them and just to find plastic, or when industrial boats come and they slice the nets of the fishermen and then they have to mend them again. And also the challenges of now aquaculture or fish farms coming in and just competing for that blue space that was traditionally reserved for small scale fisheries. So also through the Photovoice workshops, this was one of the most interesting things that came out to me, was the Vietnamese culture of whale worship, which was highlighted as a strength by participants. So Southern Vietnamese communities believe that they're the descendants of cetaceans or Ka Ong, which literally means like Mr. Fish or grandfather fish. So when a whale or a dolphin washes ashore, community members will try to push it back out to sea. But if the animal does pass away, the keepers, they'll keep the animal company, and they told me they will feed it coconut water or try to like take care of it and keep it company until it passes. And then they bury the bones, and then after 3 years, they bring the bones back up and put them in a temple for worship. And so the keepers of these temples are known as the Van Chai, and they're an elected group of local leaders, and they play really an important role. They in the past played a very important role in fisheries administration, which I had no idea about if it wasn't for the Photovoice, the participants highlighting this. So they were responsible traditionally for managing the number of fishers, mitigating conflicts, and just harmonizing fishing operations that, like Shannon had mentioned, in terms of this like spiritual, social, ecological management system, which I thought was really incredible. And then some of the Van Chai members actually shared with me these like 100-year-old tenure rights and fisheries management strategies that of course couldn't be applied exactly in today's world, but definitely it was incredible to see that these were well documented, and maybe some of these could be applied now. And so together with the Van Chai members and also with the kids, we actually submitted our contribution to the FAO interweaving some of these old management systems and then also these like kid perspectives, which was really cool. Okay, so I will go a little faster, but with India, I'll share another example from India. These are following some frames. We also do stop motion animation workshops. So these are some frames from stop motion animation made by kids from the Vihijam, which is a fishing community in Kerala, India. And so the students highlighted their own experiences and what they thought about their community. So many of them highlighted what they loved, which was their rich fishing culture and tradition. But something that was unexpected to me and was a little, they highlighted the problems that they noticed, and they directly tied them with like there being less fish and they feel like the community is more stressed. So that leads to problems that they notice, such as these feelings of desperation, which could lead to drug abuse, drinking, as well as household violence. So again, these are very intimate experiences and connections and feedback loops that these children identified. And as they are interwoven into stories, I think they are much more powerful to us and paint a larger picture of what's going on. This was a short film we also created with some students from Trivandrum Social Society, which is a nonprofit working also nearby for a more just and peaceful society. And so these girls actually chose a topic in their environment that they wanted to highlight that was impacting the health of their fishing community. And so they chose this titanium factory that was dumping toxins directly into the ocean, directly through their fishing village. And so they learned how to storyboard their idea, and then the technical ropes of filming, which was really fun. And then finally, they actually went out and created their short film. We also had a team that was creating a photojournalism article. And so they were interviewing local fishermen, some who were their own family members. And then they came up with this PDF that was explaining. So for example, the wastewater from the factory damages local people, sea temperatures rise high above normal, causing fish to swim away. The chemicals cause the sea to become acid water. There's no oxygen for the fish to breathe like the people. The people have skin diseases and respiratory problems. So again, they highlighted also that the acid water attracts more jellyfish, and those also break the nets of the local fishermen. And so again, these nuanced perspectives that really we can get through photography and the kids' own captions. And so in the last 2 minutes or 3 minutes or so, I'll talk about what we're actually doing here in Peru, where I am currently. So we're right now creating a comic book with students' inputs, and also they'll be creating future editions, but basically plastic pollution, how that's impacting their community. But we're trying to talk about it in a fantastic way. So looking at where does plastic come from, and highlighting these two characters that are based off real children from this small scale fishing community as they go off and explore, with these fantastic characters, which are like the phytoplankton from the past who got trapped in plastics. So but our main focus right now is actually this traveling festival that is touring public schools right now, virtually also, and also in person, that is working with kids to actually go and create their own stories that are stem from this traditional knowledge, but contributed with, bolstered by science, and then expressed through their own imaginations. They're creating their own photojournalism essays, and also stop motion animations, as well as murals that speak to their community strengths, the changes they're experiencing, and then daylighting challenges, and also pitching their creative solutions. So these are briefly the themes that we tend to focus on. And I'm going to share a photo essay done by some of our students. So this is Noe, and he focused on the natural cultural heritage of Lobitos, the community where we're based. So focusing on these traditional boats that use wind energy versus fossil fuels. And also the sense of place. He highlighted sense of place that fishing contributes to their community, that all the boats say the name of the community, they feel proud of them, even the ones that are quite old, they're still there, kind of like monuments to the past. We also had Robinson, who focused on plastic pollution also, so the impacts on their fishing community and the marine biodiversity. And lastly, Yadira, she was looking at the well-being of their community. So she even mentioned in the times of COVID that the fishing community is lucky because they get to work outside, and they were supplying the community with fresh fish. So when everything was shut down and isolated, at least they could still get food from the sea. And also working with Yadira, it's very cool. We actually just yesterday hired her to lead a new girls club that we're starting for surfing, and then also for doing activities like photography. So again, this like positive youth development, keeping kids here and trying to find innovative spaces for them to work. And the last example I'll just highlight is Jesus, who was one of our first photography students, and now he was contracted by an organization called Fishful Future that is just starting off to talk about zero food waste within fisheries. And so he has got a small salary to go off and work with local women in the community, highlighting different recipes that with the whole fish in mind. And so these are some of the plates that on the left is his mom and another woman from the community. And so again, I think this just demonstrates how there are so many opportunities here for kids to be involved in. By here, I mean in small scale fisheries, that there's so much ample space for innovation still. And so if we're able to have programming or educational opportunities that really engage these kids in their communities, I think there's so much positive change that can come about, and we really have a fighting chance for implementing the small scale fisheries guidelines and also just a sustainable future for these incredible communities. Here's a bit more information where you can find out about our organization, and then we have time for Q&A, so I'm gonna just stop sharing so I can see the question box again. And yes, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and write them in the question box, or in the chat, I think is also available.
I'll just say, well, we're waiting for questions to come. I didn't realize how extensive and diverse the various media types are that you guys use.
Oh, thank you so much. I think once you start to look into the transmedia field, it really, you can figure out any way to use a medium to engage like local stakeholders. But I think Photovoice definitely has more of the formula, which, but I feel like there could be room for like coming up with something for animation, or I think for video there's also, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Are you seeing any questions?
I'm just checking. I don't see any yet.
Yeah, I was just going to add that when we did that systematic review, that I actually did find some peer-reviewed articles that were using art and participatory art in various forms, and I was like, had no idea that was a format you could implement. It really makes sense. I just hadn't come across it before, and so I think I was like, well, we weren't able to include it in that review because it was getting too big, but yeah. But it was encouraging just to see the creativity and as you're saying, that you can really use it in so many different ways.
Yeah,
in so many different mediums.
Yeah, and I think when it's tied, like, I mean, the picture that you shared about the past, your example of the past, where I think it was I forget his name, but
Padirto, yeah.
Yeah, where he was like showing a picture of the youth and saying, like, well, at least they can rely on fishing for the future. Like that for me gives me a lot of hope, that because sometimes it is a little challenging when parents are like, oh, like I really don't want this for my kid, and I think you just feel the weight of all the pressure and stress that they're under right now. So but having that little bit of hope and like showing that in like a positive light and highlighting that, like, actually it's so cool and so incredible what you have in your community. And I think just having like through photography, like as you were saying, like showing that gallery and the fisheries officers coming in, it's like a point of pride. I think a lot of times we have the kids that come to our workshop sort of like this, like, oh, this is okay, I'm going to do photography, and they leave with like their photo being like, yeah, I took this picture.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. That is so cool. I know we could just keep chatting, but I don't know if there are any more questions. I know I see people there. If anybody has any comments or questions, we'd love to open the discussion. everybody.
No pressure also.
But yeah, also no pressure.
We would love to we would love to engage with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I in my I'll just keep chatting then. Project, their kids ended up picking up the cameras and using them, even though they weren't the ones like kind of signing the form and actually officially being a part of it in that way. But so it was cool to see that, because to see the interest and then to see the different perspectives they brought from their parents. But I hadn't, it's a very different thing what you're doing, which is it seems like it brings so much energy, actually really focusing on the youth and like you said, giving them an outlet and giving them a way to express things when they often are probably more overlooked in people aren't turning to them necessarily for solutions or for opinions. And so I think that's just such a powerful thing.
I mean, I think it's like a package deal, it would be ideal if like a researcher and like these programs like go into community together in a sense, because just in terms of like painting this bigger picture. But I do think that like they go perfectly hand in hand, and having these like older perspectives also, especially working with, for example, like the Van Chai members, the fishermen who are in charge of the whale temples, they were so interested in wanting the kids to be involved, because, what would happen if these, if these traditions are lost. Oh, we do have one question. I just see. Any reading recommendations if we're interested in learning more? That's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one.
Yeah, I've started just keeping like a Google Drive of different academic articles, typing in, Photovoice or participatory photography, because really, we're focused on also of small scale fisheries, but really again, like Shannon mentioned, this is a really nuanced tool that's being used in also like public health and such. So, and I think we can learn a lot from those different fields. So that would be my recommendation. I can share the link to my Google Drive of these different articles. But Shannon, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I don't know if Oriana was thinking of books or academic articles or what, but or like white papers. But I do have, from that systematic review, I have all of those papers that we included. Anything else? Great. Perfect. And I'm happy to share those as well. They might overlap with what you have, Emmy, but and also I'm happy to share the draft of what we have that's going to be, hopefully it's in revise and resubmit for Journal of Biological Conservation. So happy to share that as well. And then, but I'm not aware of any more like popular media or reading or documentaries either. I'm not aware of those, but yeah, there is one. So there is a method called community voice method, and that's a participatory film method that's been used in the formal research space. And we could also share the links to some of those films, and they're co-produced with the community, but they are someone filming participants, and the participants are on camera rather than the ones making the film. But then it's co-produced together as far as the editing and everything. So we should put together a resource list that we could share for whoever's interested. Yeah.
Maybe we can send it to TVTI to newsletter or something. But yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think we just are reaching the hour, so I'll just close by saying, like, thank you very much for your, well, first of all, Shannon, thank you so much for joining me in this, and also to TBTI team. They've been working very hard to put all these presentations together. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share about this, and then also all the attendees for your time. And yeah, we're like, whether it's through, you can search for Coast to Coast. Again, that was I can put down our website, or connect with us. But yeah, I think we're both very happy to talk more about all of anything, anything Coast to Coast or anything participatory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here.
I'll just send that, and okay. Yep. Thank you very much.
Do we end it, or does us know?
I think
I'm back. Oh, there's something's happening.
Oh, yeah. I think it's our time. I think we're ready. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you all very much for your time.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.